All right, this is Shalimar Steinberg, and today we're going to be talking about title blocks, layers, and paper space. Okay, so I'm going to get started by opening a drawing here in AutoCAD, and I am going to go in and make my basic changes to the options so that it's easier for people to see. So I'm going to turn my screen lighter. I'm going to go and turn on my right-click customizations. I'm going to turn off the view cube, and I'm going to turn off the lasso. And again, for anybody who's not familiar, that is just to make it easier for people viewing the screen in class and for me to interact with the screen. All right, so today we're going to talk about something called a title block. And in drafting, a title block is a file that allows you to provide information about the drawing that you're making. So if we were to click into our layers assignment here, you'll see that I have posted a blank title block that you can download. And you'll see that it says it was created with the student version. That happens to be what I have on my laptop at home, and so that's why it's showing up this way. This is a very basic title block. It shows a viewport, which is this inner rectangle here. And the viewport is able to be open to model space. So let's consider what that means. Model space is the black space, if we look at the tabs down here, where we draw all of our objects at their full and real size. And that means that this space is infinite. You can draw something that's 100 feet or 100 miles and draw it in that unit, and it will all be in here. Obviously, that means that if you've drawn something that's 100 feet, you're not going to be able to print that out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So what we do is to create layout tabs. And these layout tabs take us to what's called paper space. And so paper space is basically like taking a piece of paper and laying it over a window. And with this viewport, we can open that window to see what's behind the piece of paper. And we can use kind of binoculars to zoom in and out on what's behind that piece of paper and make it a size that can fit here on the piece of paper. So if I draw something in my model space, it doesn't matter what, just whatever my drawing is that I'm wanting to share with people. When I go into that layout mode, I can double click into that window, or I can click here and it will open that window. You see the line got bold. And then I can do a zoom extents in there and it will show me my drawing at a scale that fits on that paper. Now, normally the scale, if it is real size and fits on that paper, we can put the scale at 1:1, which means that for every 1 inch in the real object, we're showing it as 1 inch in the drawing. Obviously, this object I drew is bigger, so you'll see that the scale here at the bottom is a decimal, 0.386 plus a bunch of other numbers. What that means is that in order to get it at a regular scale that somebody would be familiar with, I would have to click down some options and see which ones actually work well for it. So 1 to 2 it's still a little too big. 1 to 4 is pretty good. It shows centered in the space available, but is big enough that you can see all the details that you need. So what a title block allows us to do is to have that viewport with the object zoomed into and scale it to what we want to, so our 1 to 4. And then I can tell the person receiving the drawing, I can double click out here or again click here to close that window so I don't accidentally change my scale by scrolling. And then I can tell them what date I created the drawing, so I could double click on this text and be able to edit that. And so for example, I could say today's 10/9/19. And then I could click on the scale here and change that so that it reflects the scale that I actually chose, which would be 1 to 4. And then I could change my file name to whatever I was saving it under and the drafted by name to my name. And all this just means that the person getting it now knows this information. And so, for example, if they want to then blow it back up to the full size that it's really supposed to be, they know that they just have to use a ratio, which is going to be the inverse of this, and so they would do a 4/1. scaling it up in order to get back to full size in their regular drawing. And they know what the file name is that they're looking for and as an attachment and things like that. So normally, when we have a title block like this, or any drawing in model space, we will use what are called layers. So up until now, if we look at our layers bar, which is right up here at the top under Home, you'll see that there's a 0 layer. This layer is the default when you log into AutoCAD, but it is one that we don't typically use for most of our drawings because it has special properties that are only useful for blocks for the most part. So in regular drawing, you will have a title block that you save as a template and reuse over and over again. And in that title block, you will have created the layers that you need to do your work. So for example, if I open layer properties, I'll see that there is this first layer that is the 0 layer. And when I look at it, there are several things available that we could see about it. It says whether it's on or off, and there's a little light bulb there, and if I click on the light bulb, I'll turn it off. They don't like you to turn the current layer on, so that's why I got that warning. And turning it on or off means that you can't interact with it. You can also just freeze the layer by taking the little sun icon and turning it to a little snowflake. And that will allow you to make it so that you can't interact with it and you won't mess it up by any means or anything like that. You can lock a layer, although I do not recommend this because when you lock it, not only can the person getting it not interact with it, but you can't either until you unlock it. And people tend to forget that they've locked something and then not be able to figure out why they're not interacting with it. So it's not the best idea. Then there is whether it's going to print out or not. So you can make certain layers print and certain layers not print if you don't want them to on your printouts. And the reason why you might want them to print or not print, for example, if you have text and you have a drawing that is really big, but you're scaling it down to a really small piece of paper, that text is going to be really hard to read. And so it may be easier just to say don't print the text in the drawing. So that it's not distracting to people because it'll just look like little blotches instead of being actual words that they can read. You can have a color, and so each layer can be colored. Typically the main objects in your drawing you're just going to leave white. And the nice thing about white in the black space is that when you go to paper space, it will turn black. So you don't have to change it for yourself because the paper space is white whereas the model space is black. So it'll flip back and forth between those automatically. You can have a line type. The default is continuous, which just means a straight continuing line. But you can load in other ones by going to load here. And so you can have dashed lines for hidden lines, which are the lines that you can't see on the face of an object, like edges or holes that are in the back of an object. You can have center lines, which show you where the centers of a hole are, etc. So those are all different kinds of things that you can add. And then you can add a line weight. And the line weight for most objects is going to be default, but for any of your main objects is going to be a thicker line, so you would pick 0.30 millimeters. And so that won't show on your screen, but what it means is that when you go to print it, those lines will be darker, because it's really nice for someone getting the drawing to be able to say, okay, those darker lines are the actual object, the thinner lines are all just information about the object, like dimensions or text or things like that that are added in. And so for the assignment that you'll be doing, you'll be creating some layers. So when you're in the layer manager here and you want to create a layer, there's this little icon that shows a piece of paper with a little sunburst next to it. And if you click on that, you can create a new layer. And it will always be based off of whatever the currently selected layer is or the previous layer that you just created. As part of that, you can give it a new name. So I might call mine text. I have my caps lock on, sorry. And then you can tell it whether you want it to be frozen or anything. I only do that on an as-needed basis, so I never start a layer off being frozen. You can tell it what color you want it to be. So for my text, I might choose dark blue. You can tell it whether you want it to be continuous or other. For text, generally, it's always going to be continuous because you don't want weird dashes in your letters. but that is an option if you're doing some kind of signage that calls for it or something like that. And then I'm going to leave the text as default line weight. So now, when I'm in my drawing and I create some text, I can either first move to that layer and create my text, or like I did here, I accidentally created on the 0 layer. What do? All I have to do is select it, go up to my drop down, and click next to the word text, and it switches it over onto that layer for me. And so then I'm able to control what layers things are on. Now you might ask, why are layers useful? And the reason for that is because when you have, say, a huge drawing and you want to share it with people. So for example, this is a large drawing of an office floor plan, right? When I zoom in on it, I can see the individual cubicles, I can see the computers and everything. Now, if I'm sharing this drawing with, say, the plumber, he does not need to know where every single computer is going to be and where the chairs are going to be, etc. It just makes the file bigger than it needs to be, and it looks cluttered to him. So what I can do is I can go in here to layers, and I can turn off the layers for any of the things that I think are just cluttering the screen up for him. And I can send him only the layers he needs, which means that he gets a smaller file that's easier to open and only has the stuff that's important to him. So for a plumber, for example, I would probably give him all the walls. I would give him where the electrical is going to run so that he knows where he has to run his conduit next to the electrical, etc. And that would be the basic information that he needs, and it would be a much easier drawing for him to get. It also means that, for example, if I were to send this to the client, they might be overwhelmed by some of the information, or I might have really detailed technical information added in. For them, I could turn that information off and just have the basic shapes of their furniture and where the walls are going to be, etc. And that way they won't be overwhelmed by the look of the drawing either, and can get a better idea of what it's actually going to appear like after it's completely built. So that's why layers are really useful. The other nice thing about layers is that, for example, in this drawing I have like 29 layers. If I want to, I can create filters that allow me to sort those layers by specific criteria. So for example, when naming my layers, I put E for all of the layers that are electrical related. I would put A for all of the layers that are architectural, so like the doors and walls, etc. And I could do a letter in front of the ones that are like office supply related, etc. And so I could set my filter to sort, okay, just show me the electrical layers, or just show me the layers that have a certain word in them. You can even use asterisks in order to give you wildcards. And so you could say, give me everything that has the letter E, a dash, and then an asterisk. So any letters after that, whatever they may be. And it would sort all those layers out for you. And then you can individually decide to turn all those layers on or off, depending on what you need, or change the color of all of them at once, or something like that if you want to. And the way that you do that is just by going here to Filters, and up above it, it'll say New Property Filter. You can click on it, and then you name it whatever the filter is going to be based on. So I could say Electrical, for example. And then I would go down here and I would create the filter definition. So I would say name, E dash, and then the asterisk. And so it's going to then immediately create a filter right here, electrical, that only shows me those layers that have the E dash asterisk. I can also go back to all used layers, which will show me all the layers that are used in the drawing. Or I could go to all layers, which will show me all layers that were in the title block, whether they were used in the drawing or not. Okay? So that's the basics of a title block and layers use-wise. We will learn more about creating a title block a little bit later in the term. I will have you create one for another sized piece of paper. Paperspace, we just talked about the fact that it is the space where we show the things that are in our drawing. And so if there's a viewport there, you can go back into it, like this one, and I can go in here and I can go into that window and out of that window as needed in order to show me what's in my model space. Okay, so then actually that's it for this lecture, and then I will post another one quickly that shows how to do the assignment for this title block.